Thank you for the invitation. So I would like to thank the organizers. It's my first time in a statistics conference, so I'm happy to talk to statisticians, although I'm not really myself very good at statistics. I don't know very much, but I hope that I can say something that will be of interest to statisticians. I will talk about free probability, which is a theory of probability with non-commuting random variables. And it is interesting because it deals with, it allows us to deal with random matrices of large size and say highly non-trivial things about these objects. So let me explain that. Okay.
You have a button on the left. Oh, yes.
Here. Oh, je sais pas comment ça marche ce truc. Comment ça marche le... C'est censé... Ok, ça c'est le pointeur, et pour faire avancer, j'appuie ici, c'est tout.
Oui, mais tu peux en fait...
Ah, je peux le faire. Ah, d'accord, parce que c'était pas allumé, d'accord. Ok. It's okay, I think... Okay. Ouais. Okay. Okay, sorry for the... I will start with a very simple example that, of course, everybody understands here very well, which is random vectors in large dimensions. So suppose you have k vectors in an n-dimensional space, and you know the norms of the vectors. But you don't know the angular part of the vectors. So you assume that they're chosen independently, so the angular part, on the sphere of dimension n, uniformly and independently. Well, we know that in this situation, for n very large, with high probability, the k vector will be almost orthogonal. They will form an orthogonal set up to a small error. Okay, so the probability that the inner product is bigger than epsilon will be very small when n is very large. Okay, so this means that if we look at vectors, we can fix the geometry of k vector if they are chosen as random independently. Their geometry is completely fixed just by knowing the norms of the vectors. All the other things are completely frozen when n goes to infinity. Okay, that's the law of Flash number, or concentration of measure, if you want. So what I will explain is how to obtain similar results when instead of vectors, you look at matrices. And of course, the geometry of matrices is much more complex than that of vectors. In order to specify a vector, well, you need the angular part, and you need to know the norm. So up to a rotation, a vector is uniquely determined by its norm. And for matrices, instead of rotation, we'll look at conjugation by orthogonal or Hermitian or unitary matrices. And we know that up to conjugation, the geometry of matrices is much more complex because we need to know all eigenvalues. And if we have several matrices, if we want to specify a bunch of matrices up to a global conjugation, then we will need to know much more information. I explain how to do that. So I will explain how the theory of free probability, which was invented by a Romanian mathematician, Dan Voiculescu, about now more than 30 years ago. So this theory is able to handle these things. I will not go very deep into the theory. I will show you essentially the application to random matrices. So let me give a specific example of the situation which I want to consider. So let me take two matrices of size n. N will be large. pi1 and pi2, and I will choose them so as to have the simplest possible spectrum. So there will be just orthogonal projections on two subspaces of dimension. So here I choose dimension n over 2, or I could have chosen other dimensions. So this means that my matrices have the form pi I is ui times the canonical matrix of projection on the n over 2 first coordinates, and then ui star. So and I will choose the ui, which are unitary matrices. So my matrices will be, I'm working in complex space and looking at Hermitian matrices, but you could also look at, if you prefer real matrices, I could take orthogonal matrices. It would make no difference for what I'm going to talk about. So you look at two matrices like that, and the ui, I will take unitary matrices, independent. So the UI, they will specify the eigenspaces, so the spaces on which you project. And I will choose them independently and with a Haar measure on the unitary group. So the Haar measure is a unique measure on the unitary group, which is a probability measure, and which is invariant by translation in the group. Okay, so it's the most natural, if you want, measure on the unitary group. And now what you do is you take these two matrices, so these are two orthogonal projections, and say you want to compute the spectrum of the sum, pi1 plus pi2. So the spectrum of pi1 is just zeros and 1, half 0 and half 1. The same for pi2, so they have the same distribution of, the empirical distribution on the spectrum is just Bernoulli distribution, 1/2 over 1 and 1/2 on 2. Okay, and now you take the spectrum and you look at what you get. And what you get is that if you draw the histogram, if you take, for an experiment here, here I took n to be 800, and you see this kind of behavior of the spectrum, and it is typical. And well, I draw a curve, which is this curve here, y equals 1 over pi square root of x 2 minus x, which you can recognize as the density of the arcsine distribution, famous distribution in probability theory. And that actually it turns out that this is the limit distribution for the spectrum of the sum of the two matrices. This is one of the results that you can prove using free probability theory. What you can prove is that this spectrum becomes deterministic in the empirical distribution will converge to this probability measure when n goes to infinity. Okay, so this is the kind of result that you can get using free probability theory. It's very useful for understanding that and understanding large matrices. As you see, it is very different from what you would get by taking two independent random variables with Bernoulli distribution and taking the sum. If you take two symmetric Bernoulli distribution like these ones with probability 1/2 on 2 and 1/2 on 0, then you know the sum will be a binomial, and it will be, of course, and in the center on 1 you would have a probability 1/2 that you get something around 1. Whereas you see here that the probability that your eigenvalues are near 1 are very small compared to the case of the sum of two Bernoulli distributions. So it shows that really the random matrices behave very differently from commutative random variables. What we want to do is to consider matrices as random variables, but of course matrices don't commute, especially large matrices don't commute at all. And you see this kind of phenomenon which occurs, which is very different from what you get in usual probability theory. So one more thing, there's been a lot of progress on random matrices in the last 20 or 30 years. And there are many different problems that you can focus on in probability theory, looking at random matrices, which I think are of interest in statistics also. And one of the problems is to understand the behavior of the spectrum in the local behavior on the spectrum. So, but no, I don't know how it works. Oh yes, can you see something? Yes. Okay, so in order to do that, you have to look at this picture, and you take a very small interval, and you look how many eigenvalues fall into this very small interval. And in this, when you do that, you see that the behavior of the eigenvalues, when you look at the eigenvalues close enough to see them individually, then what you get is a point process, in general a determinantal point process. But this is a very different, of course, scaling than what I'm going to see here. Here I'm going to look at the overall behavior of the eigenvalues, like looking at for example, limits of empirical distributions on the eigenvalues. And I will not look at the detailed behavior of the spectrum, which is a completely different story on which free probability has nothing to say. So we have completely different regimes that we can look at in this study of random matrices. And free probability is really concerned with the large-scale behavior of the eigenvalues, in which you can see a lot of different behavior. Whereas when you look at local behavior, really, there are only very, very few models that model the local behavior. So it's quite a different story. Okay, so in order to explain how to deal with this kind of problem, I will explain just some basic results on, I would say, invariant theory for matrices. So what do I mean by that? If you have a complex self-adjoint matrix, and you want to know, well, you know this matrix, that two complex self-adjoint matrices, well, they have the same spectrum if and only if they are conjugated by some unitary. Okay? So this is, of course, the spectral theorem for Hermitian matrices, or as I said, you could also look at real self-adjoint matrices, it's the same, but with orthogonal matrices instead of unitaries. There is another way to encode the spectrum. Instead of saying it is a sequence of numbers, you could look at the empirical distribution on the spectrum and look at the moments. And these are given by this sequence of numbers, the traces of the powers of the matrices. And here I divide by n so that I really have the moments of some probability distribution. So these are sequence of moments of some probability distribution. And two matrices are conjugate if and only if they have the same powers of moments. They have the same moments. Okay. So in the sequel, I will just use small t for the trace because I will always take traces of matrices with divided by n so that the trace of the identity is 1. I want to deal with empirical measures and probability measures, so it will be more convenient. Okay, now let us look instead of one matrix at a set of n matrices, M1, Mn. And, well, I want to know when two n-tuples of matrices are conjugate by the same unitary. And there is a result which the oldest reference I found was by Procesi 78. It's a theorem in algebra. But I would thought this would have been much older result, I mean, going back to the beginning of 20th century, but I couldn't find any reference. So the theorem is the following. If you want to know, because it is very, very natural theorem if you think in terms of probability theory. If you look at the probability measure on the Rn, you know the probability measure if you know all the moments. I mean, suppose it is not too large, I mean, the moments are not too large, then you know, if you know all the joint moments of the coordinates, you know everything about the probability distribution, you know everything. And there is something which is analogous for matrices. And the quantities you have to consider are the following. That's the traces of the products of the matrices. Just the analogues of the joint moments of random variables, but instead of taking the joint moments, you take the traces of the products of the matrices. But here we are dealing with matrices, so we have to be careful that the matrices don't commute. So we have to take all the products with all the all sequences I1, IR in every possible order. Okay? So if we know all these numbers, it turns out that we know the matrices up to conjugation. That is, if two sets of matrices, say M1, Mn and L1, Ln, share the same joint moments, then actually they are conjugate by some unitary. Okay, some unitary U, which is the same for all the, there is a unitary which conjugates the set of matrices L1, Ln to the set of matrices M1, Mn. Okay? And of course, it's as I said, it's a very natural theorem. If you're a probabilist or a statistician, you know that the sequence of moments, joint moments, determines a probability measure on Rn, and this is really the non-commutative analog of that. Okay, so it's. The matrices don't commute. The matrices, if you think that the matrices are random variables, the spectrum, the empirical distribution of the spectrum is their distribution, but they don't commute. And so you want to specify the joint distribution of the matrices. So what you have to do is specify the joint moments. And if you know the joint moments, you know that two sets of matrices which have the same joint moments are the same up to some unitary conjugation. Okay, so it's a generalization for several matrices of the well-known spectral theorem that two matrices with the same spectrum are conjugated by some unitary. Okay, and in some sense, it's a generalization of the theorem of the characterization of probability measures by moments. Okay. Okay, so now let me look at the following situation, which is the analog of what I was looking when I was looking at vectors. Let me take xi, which are matrices of the following type. They are of the type ui, di, ui star, where the di are some diagonal matrices on which I fix the spectrum. So I will fix the spectrum of di, but I will choose the ui, which gives me the eigenvectors of x, by taking some unitary random matrix with a Haar measure. And I take the ui independently. Okay, so this means I have a bunch of matrices. I know the spectrum, okay, because the di have been fixed, but I don't know the eigenvectors, and the eigenvectors I chosen completely at random. Okay, for each I have a basis of eigenvectors, orthonormal basis, but it is chosen at random, and they are completely independent. Now the main result, the connection between free probability theory and random matrices is due to Voiculescu in 1990. What he said is that when n goes to infinity, these numbers, the trace of the products of the xi, they are given by explicit polynomials in the moments of each of the matrices. The trace of the a to the k, which are just the trace of xi to the k.
Wait a minute. So di is modified when n is changing.
Yes, yes, but okay, yes. But what I say is that I assume that I know these quantities, trace of di to the k, okay, but I don't know the eigenvectors. I have some matrices, I know they have some spectrum, but I don't know the eigenvectors. What I say is that I can compute this thing, the trace of the product, with a very good, with very high probability and with very small error when n goes to infinity. Exactly as when you have two vectors, you don't know the angular part, you just know the norm, then you know that the inner product will be 0 essentially. In the case of vectors, it's very simple. Here, it's more complicated. What it says is that in some sense, the geometry of a set of matrices, x1, xn, becomes fixed when the dimension goes to infinity. Of course, you can vary each of the matrices can have some spectrum. It can choose the spectrum it wants, but if the eigenvectors are chosen at random, then the respective position of the matrices will be completely fixed by some explicit. So I will give example of what I mean by that. Very simple examples. The first simplest example is that the trace of x1, x2 will be, remember that the trace with small t means that I take the trace divided by the dimension. So the trace of x1, x2 will be equal to, or asymptotically equal to the trace of x1 times the trace of x2. This means if you want that the covariance goes to 0. Okay? The trace of x1, x2 minus trace of x1, trace of x2. So if you take two random matrices which have independent eigenvectors, they may have some dependent or some deterministic eigenvalues, but the important fact is that if the eigenvectors are independent, then asymptotically the trace will factorize, or the trace of the powers will factorize, and we can have much more complicated things. For example, if you look at the trace of x1, x2 times x1, x2, then this can be expressed asymptotically like the trace of x1 squared, the trace of x2 squared, plus the trace of x1 squared, trace of x2 squared, minus the trace of x1 squared, trace of x2 squared. Okay, so this is, the theorem of Voiculescu is that if you take the trace of any monomial in the Xi for a bunch of matrices as I described before, then there are analogous polynomials that you can completely, that you can write down explicitly, and that give you the asymptotic value of these things. So, for example, it gives you an immediate test. If you have two matrices, and you want to check whether the eigenvectors have some relation, then the first thing you can check is that whether they have the traces of the power of the product is the product of the traces. This is the thing you can check, because if in high dimensions they should almost coincide. Or you can, of course, each of these equalities will give you a test for the independence of the eigenvectors of your matrices, which is something which might be helpful. I'm not a statistician, so I leave you to decide whether this can be helpful to you. But in principle, I mean, this is you got a lot of tests to make to see whether two matrices are, whether there is some dependency in two matrices between the eigenvectors. So this might be helpful. Yes?
So going back to the earlier questions, when n goes to infinity, are we supposed to think that entries of the DIs are bounded, or they can grow with dimension? Or?
Yes. Okay. Assume, for example, that all the DIs are bounded by 1, for example. Okay. Yes, you need some bounds, of course.
It cannot be too wide.
No. Say they remain bounded by some constant, for example. Yeah. Yes.
In these tests you mentioned, do you know anything about the behavior of the difference between the large and right-hand side?
Oh yes. A lot about it is known. Okay, but I will not tell you. I will not even tell you how to compute these polynomials explicitly, because it's technical, and I mean, I don't have so much time. I will just explain the very basics, the idea of the theory, and what it is about. Ah. J'ai l'impression, je ne sais pas s'il y a encore une pile. Okay. A corollary of that is that if you know the spectrum of x1, xn, a bunch of matrices, then you can compute the spectrum of any polynomial in the Xi. Okay? If you make the assumption that I made, that the eigenvectors are independent, of course, and the dimension is large. Okay? For example, if you want to compute the trace of if you want to compute the moments of the sum, so the trace of x1 plus x2 to the n, you can expand, and all the things on the right will have some asymptotic behavior when the matrices become large. You can compute them in terms of the moments of x1 or x2. and then it will be, then you can from that compute everything. Okay. Well, in principle, if you know how to do the computation, I explained. Ça marche? Oui. Okay. Thank you. Okay, so as I said, I will not explain how you do the computation of these polynomials, like the one, for example, the one which is here. You can compute this polynomial on the right here. There is a whole theory, combinatorial theory, which has been developed by Roland Speicher mainly, and other people. It's quite sophisticated, and there is a very good exposition in this book, which appeared in 2006. And it's a kind of analog of the theory of cumulants that we have in probability and statistics, computing cumulants of random variables. There is a notion of free cumulant, but I mean it's too complicated for me to explain it here. No. Okay. So I will give you an example of the results that you obtain. The example is linked to the first thing that I showed you about the sum of projections. Suppose you have two matrices, you know the spectra. So my matrices are L and M. You know the spectra, so you know the traces of L to the N and the traces of M to the N. So now how do you compute the moments of the sum? Well, the answer is given by the notion of free cumulants, and it is given by the following algorithm. So you start by computing the resolvent of the matrix, that is the trace of 1 over z minus x, where z is some complex variable. And you can expand this trace in powers of 1 over z. So it starts with 1 over z, and then you expand in negative powers of z. And in the expansion, you get just the moments of the variable. Okay, so it is just the generating series for the moment. And now what you do is you invert this generating series with respect to composition of functions. So you find a function k. K will have some expansion into positive powers of z, but it will start with 1 over z. So if you want, you expand, you invert this function near z equal infinity. And so k will be defined near 0 by 1 over z plus some convergent series of positive powers of z. And then, well, what we call the Rn of x the free cumulants of the matrix. They can be determined by the moments, or the moments determine the cumulants. There is a triangular system between the two, which this triangular system is just the expression of this identity, which is here, which means that the two functions are inverse of each other. If you plug one of them into the other, you will see easily that these moments, the moments and the cumulants, are obtained one from the other by some polynomial system that you can easily solve. I mean, there are explicit formula for the solution. And now, suppose that I go back to my model of random matrices. So L is some diagonal matrix that you have conjugate by some unitary. M is some other diagonal matrix that you conjugate by some unitary which is independent. So you choose the eigenvectors at random. And well, the result is that for large n, the free cumulant of the sum is equal to the free cumulant, to the sum of the free cumulants with very high probability. And we have a asymptotic behavior of these free cumulants. And I mean, this is a special case of the whole theory of free probability where you can express these complicated polynomials. And here we have this simple algorithm for computing these things. And of course, since we have this polynomial system, if we know the free cumulants, we can come back and know the moments. Okay, so the moments and free cumulants determine each other. So in particular, if you know the free cumulants of L plus M, you know the moments of L plus M. So you know really the spectrum of the sum of the two matrices. So in the case that I mentioned, so you look at orthogonal projection on random subspaces of dimension n over 2, you can do the computation. And what you see is that you get this probability distribution. It is a unique probability distribution which has these free cumulants. So in this sense, I explained this in the more general setting. Suppose you have two probability measures, mu and nu. And so what you do is you compute, instead of taking the trace of 1 over z minus x for my matrix, I just compute the Stieltjes transform of the probability measure mu, which is the integral of 1 over z minus x d mu of x. And then I can also, again, I can compute the inverse of this function. And this gives me numbers, Rn of mu, which are here, which are the free cumulants of mu. And now you can define an operation on probability measure, which is like the usual convolution of measures, which is called the free convolution of measures. And it is described by this equation here. So the free convolution of mu and nu has cumulants, which are the sums of the cumulants of mu and the cumulants of nu. Okay? So in some sense, the free cumulants, they are like the cumulants of ordinary random variables, of, if you want, the log of the Fourier transform. They are additive under the convolution. But now it is for free convolution instead of classical convolution. And the free convolution describes exactly this situation when you have two matrices, you know the spectra, you want to compute the spectrum of the sum. The spectrum of the sum is some empirical distribution, asymptotically, which is given by the free convolution of the two empirical distributions. Now there is a free central limit theorem. Using this free convolution, you can add random variables which are, I would say, free, not independent. And exactly like in the classical central limit theorem, if you take them to be centered, to have a variance sigma squared, then if you take x1 plus x2 plus xn over square root of n, then they will converge in law towards some distribution, which is not the Gaussian distribution. It is a random matrix analog of the Gaussian distribution. It is the semicircle distribution, which describes the empirical distribution of a large Gaussian matrix. Okay, so in some sense we are closing the square. So if you think that x1, xn are random matrices, and you take x1, x2, xn over square root of n with fixed dimension, they will converge to some random matrix, which is a Gaussian matrix by the usual central limit theorem. And now, if we let the dimension go to infinity, we know that the spectrum of the random matrix with Gaussian entries will converge to semicircle distribution. So this theorem, in some sense, is a very natural theorem. It gives some, I would say, a conceptual explanation to the appearance of the semicircle distribution in the distribution of random matrices with Gaussian entries. But there are many more interesting laws that you can find in free. Oops, sorry. Okay, so this is the semicircle law with variance sigma squared. It is given by this. So it's called semicircle, but if you draw the density, of course, it is a semi-ellipse, like that. So it's minus, it's between minus 2 sigma and 2 sigma. Okay. It is the ellipse with this axis, which has a surface equal to 1. And they are characterized by the fact that if we compute the inverse of the Stieltjes transform, it is given by this simple formula. Exactly when you compute the log of the Fourier transform of the Gaussian, you just find x squared. And here you just find 1 over z plus z sigma squared. Okay, so it is really the analog of the Gaussian distribution in free probability. And when you have this free convolution, you can do a lot of things about. For example, you can look at You can look at freely invisible distribution, infinitely divisible distributions. There is a theory, since you know how to convolve probability distributions in the sense of free convolution, you can look at freely infinitely divisible distribution. This makes sense. There is a theory of freely infinitely divisible distributions, and actually there is a bijection between freely infinitely divisible distributions and classical infinitely divisible distribution. This bijection is not the identity. As you see, the image of the Gaussian distribution is the semicircle distribution, and there are lots of correspondence. There is an analog of the stable distributions. There is an analog of the Poisson distribution, and there is, of course, the analog of the Lévy-Kenshin. There is an analog of the Lévy-Kenshin formula. I mean, so a lot of things that you can do with classical probability distribution. You can find analogs for free probability distribution. Extreme values also, there is a theory of extreme values. And there are some very deep connection between these probability distribution and the classical analogs, which are far from being understood. And so perhaps this probability distribution, this new probability distribution may be of some interest in some statistical investigation, but that I leave that to you to decide because it's not my part. So thank you for your attention.
So the empirical distribution of the eigenvalues of a random matrix, large random matrix, is an analog of the distribution in free probability. My question is, what is the analog of joint distribution?
Of joint distribution?
Joint distribution.
Oh, it is exactly what I wrote here. The joint distribution, it's this. It's the data of the joint moments. If you have classical real random variables, you can look at their joint moment, expectation of their products. And this is exactly the analog. So it's a family of numbers, and they characterize the distribution. And this theorem is that there is, again, in the world of matrices, there is an analog that these numbers characterize completely the matrices up to conjugation.
Other questions?
Yeah.
When you look at the extreme points, the emergence of Tracy-Whedon distributions.
Oh yes, yes.
How the Tracy-Whedon distribution, which is linked with the extreme eigenvalue?
Well, I mean, this is, as I said, this is something which is related to the local behavior of eigenvalues. So this is something that you don't see in free probability. Okay, so this is free probability is really concerned with the global behavior, and we can't say anything about the local behavior. It's completely different scaling, so you don't see that.